which is always a gorgeous light here on the west side. I also want to augment something that philosophically has been of deep interest for many years, and it's about the Isha Upanishad. And the Isha Upanishad talks about two types of darkness. There's a darkness that is just the troubles of the world. And then there's the darkness that is the deep darkness. And in that deep darkness, we find the encounter with that which is beyond expression. And we emerge from that deep darkness healed and restored. And one of the aspects of Dr. Hagelin's work is looking at that original darkness, looking at the dark matter, and finding in that dark matter a beautiful, beautiful symmetry. And this is an aspect of his work that accounts for why it remains so relevant, and also accounts for the success of what we're hearing about here today, that it's in that darkest place within our own bodies that we find our strength, but that which we need to restore some symmetry. So again, I'm taking these metaphors and these physical realities, but inviting us to, within our own darkness, to find our creativity and then allow the world to be restored. Naveen and Pratima have done such remarkable work in Los Angeles in their many years, including the establishment of the Doshi chair at UCLA, and the Doshi professorship and the Doshi Bridgebuilder Award here at Loyola Marymount. And as we welcome Naveen to come up and to share his reflections on Dr. Hagelin, I just feel deeply touched that we're able to do so much in this place because of community support and community outreach. And I just deeply want to express my gratitude to you both, for who you are and what you do. So please, come.
Good evening and greetings, friends. And yes, happy Diwali, since we are only a few days away from India's Festival of Light. I have a question before I start reading my notes. How many in the audience born in the month of this month, October? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and of course, my dear friend, Michael Bush, born today, right? Today. You know, this makes the event very special, right, Chris? To having so many of out of audience born this month, and specifically very close to even October 7th. I'll accept that. We have known prominent bridge builders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., advocating Gandhi's ahimsa, Houston Smith building bridges between multiple traditions in multiple continents, and how can I forget an institution like LMU, where we have gathered, not just today, but for over a decade, 12 years, I think, 13 years, where we have celebrated and honored bridge builders of multiple human endeavors. Thank you, LMU. Robin is not here?
Robin is here.
Thank you, Robin, Chris, Dana, for organizing and honoring bridge builders from all walks of life. I like you to give them a good clap. Thank you. Today we are gathered here to honor Dr. John Hagelin, a quantum physicist and the president of another institution, Maharishi University of Management, an institution constituted of many bridge builders, like yourself, Dr. Hagelin. I see many common threads between the Joshuites and Shaivites, also known as scholars of Vedic science, of these two institutions. One of them is to encourage students to become bridge builders, and the second is that both are connected to scientific research. So my first question, Dr. Hagelin, can these two institutions become sister universities like they do among cities of different countries? So concerted effort goes a long way. You are a highly recognized bridge builder connecting modern science and spirituality. Your accomplishments include widely accepted theory of galactic supersymmetric particles produced during the Big Bang. I think that's what Chris was talking about. You are among very few who applies this knowledge and the knowledge of the sciences of yoga and Vedas for the benefit of humankind, accepting the primacy of mind and consciousness over matter, unlike scientists deeply submerged in materialism. I know you had worked at CERN in Switzerland, the largest particle accelerator in the world. There is a large statue of dancing Shiva at CERN, symbolizing the cosmic cycles of creation and destruction, a symbol which was first brought to the attention of the West by physicist Fritjof Capra in his book, The Tao of Physics. Please enlighten us if the battle is still on about the interpretation of the Natraj at CERN. And what is your opinion about Higgs boson particles? Are they really God particles? Discovered at CERN. There is a symmetry and a beauty that physicist Capra observed in figure of Nataraja. This reminds me of the Vedic saying, Satyam Shivam Sundaram, or truth, goodness, and beauty as the primary attributes of the divine. The Greek philosopher Plato also saw truth, goodness, and beauty as the highest living transcendental ideals and the fellowship of these attributes. Thus, he also saw the beauty in truth and goodness, so did spiritual master and the trained physicist Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Symmetry, which is the essence of beauty, is also the basis of physics, whose seeking is the search for truth. That brings me to the quest for unity in many fields of human endeavor, including the unity of nature's forces, often described as the Holy Grail. I believe, Dr. Hagelin, you have been working to discover the theory of unification of all four fundamental forces of nature. Spiritual master Maharishi also saw the beauty in nature's symmetry and worked to unite humanity by finding truth in nature's symmetry and in every tradition. I remember another physicist, the late President of India, APJ Abdul Kalam. I will quote from an email I had received after our meeting in 2005, commenting on my article on Gandhi's spirituality. And I'm quoting, "Dear Navinji, I'm really moved by your last paragraph. You may change the path to go around the obstacles so long as the direction is towards the mountaintop, where all paths unite." Beautiful and enchanting, and unquote. We have many obstacles to go around to achieve peace, harmony, and brotherhood. A better word is probably human unity word. I have traveled a long way in America from the day I arrived on 13th August 1958. I heard Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he uttered the words in 1963, "I have a dream." With a bit of modification, I repeat him to say, "I have a dream today that the divinity of nature's beauty will be revealed and all flesh shall experience it together." Perhaps we would also agree to the aspiration, "I have a dream that one day a philosopher president will intercept the current descent of human values in our country and guide the people towards the mountaintop." We had also learned the hard way with the experience of the Vietnam War during 60s and early 70s, not to get involved in wars. Later on in the 70s and 60s, Guru Dev saw a fertile ground for the future of humanity, particularly in America. This is the time we need to go around the obstacle, Dr. Hagelin, and rediscover the path towards the mountaintop. Once you ran for president of this nation, now is the time the country needs a leader like you. A clean, uncut, it's not funny. A leader like you, a clean, uncorrupt idealist and non-materialist leader. Not a believer in being exceptional if it means being superior to rule the world like the colonialists of yesteryears. We need to replace the terrible polarization that contradicts the Buddha's middle path. We need to build bridges of moderation. We need to replace divide and rule with inclusiveness and integration without losing the uniqueness of individuals, cultures, and countries. This is the time to recognize the mistakes when the distance towards the mountaintop keeps increasing. This is the time to apply the law that our Constitution states unequivocally, all men are created equal, not just in America, but all over the world. When you ran for American presidency, I'm sure you did not expect to get elected. Elephant and donkey were funded 1,000 times more than you were. May I suggest that for the good of this nation, you should first consider running for a Senate or a governor. It may be necessary to descend in the swamp and become one of them to increase the odds of winning. A philosopher king needs to give up the contempt for power. Since power stops the evolutionary process, a reverse movement and descent begins, eventually becoming the nemesis of the great ideals of liberty, fraternity, and equality. Power corrupts as we are experiencing today in America. The descent to corruption of the American Revolution for independence was intercepted by a succession of brilliant philosopher presidents like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. I had the misfortune to witness the assassination of another philosopher president, John F. Kennedy. We need you to rejuvenate and take us further ahead from the dawn of age of enlightenment, deeply rooted for 5 millennia, established by Gurudev. You will have plenty of support from all of us when they hear you and understand your message of human potential, not just getting rich, become compassionate and charitable, but cultivate a total control over your natural selves through meditation and transcend to the mountaintop where all humanity becomes one. There shall be a day when Raja Ram Hagelin is presiding over, not on Mum, but over whole USA. That is when we'll remember today, October 7th, when this movement was initiated, right? Please welcome this year's Bridgebuilder Award, Dr. Hagelin.
We're facing the photographer. We're facing the photographer. You come in, and you go in next to the V.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Beautiful. So we welcome Dr. Hagelin to come forward, and I wanted to just add a couple of items. Supersymmetric relics from the Big Bang. This paper is now recognized as establishing the leading theory of galactic dark matter, that supersymmetric particles that were produced during the Big Bang that surround the galaxies today in the shape of spherical dark matter halos. We also had a demonstration yesterday about how we're all surrounded with this incredible halo, and that also is important and measurable. And also to recognize that the work that he has done has spread rapidly to more than 22 countries, and that in his leadership of Maharishi University of Management, he continues to supervise the training of thought leaders, people who are ready to marry the wisdom of Ayurveda with the challenges of the modern world. So thank you so much.
Chris. Thank you. I'm deeply touched and greatly honored to be recognized with this award by a family whom I admire deeply, and for a cause I am greatly dedicated to. In our world today, it is absolutely essential that we bring to the fore the fundamental unity of humanity, which is a scientific truth in this scientific age, that we are fundamentally one at our core. But the superficial senses paint a different picture, and they dominate the thinking of most individuals who see differences in skin, in dress, in culture, and creed. And those differences have come to dominate, which is a dangerous situation in the world and certainly a common one. And that danger has really become urgent. And at this point, firstly, I am dedicated and have been to fulfilling this mission of building bridges among cultures, of bringing out, of revealing, with many of you in this room who are dedicated to a similar cause in your own ways, revealing the core truth of every spiritual tradition and demonstrating that that truth is one. And not just even spiritual traditions, but all the deep sciences that attempt to fathom nature's depth will ultimately come to that same realization. A small piece of this bridge building I am going to ambitiously try to present today, and that is the unification of the cutting edge of fundamental particle physics and unified field theory with Ayurveda and yoga, with the ancient Vedic wisdom. And I'll be bringing out a few key points along the way, and to organize these points, I have taken the common thread that has guided our day for the last 2 days. The title, Ayurvedic Medicine is Unified Field-Based Medicine. Ultra-modern, cutting-edge, unified field-based medicine. What is the unified field? It's the unified source of this diversified universe. It is the fountainhead of all the laws of nature governing every aspect of the universe. This discovery really has emerged throughout the course of the previous, and especially in this early century, by recognizing that the universe is structured in layers of creation. Layers upon layers of creation, like layers of an onion. And the surface crust, the surface of the onion, is dominated by the study, and has been the focus of study for hundreds of years, and that is what's called classical physics, physics of the macroscopic, the physics of the sensory world. And those sensory worlds consist of things like bricks. But about halfway through the last century, a deeper understanding of reality began to be revealed in the science of what is called quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is dedicated to the understanding of the atom. You might think that the normal laws of nature we're familiar with, like Newton's laws, might work fairly well in understanding small systems as well as big ones, but they don't. The understanding of the atom requires an entirely new language, an entirely new logic, a whole new mathematics. And that is the world of quantum mechanics, which is a rather perplexing world to our classical macroscopic intuition. When it came to understanding the atomic nucleus, which is 1,000,000 times smaller, a total rewrite of quantum mechanics was necessary, now called quantum field theory, in order to understand the smaller world of nuclear particles and subnuclear particles. And that great progress, really of the last century, led to the physics of the 21st century, which is focused on the unified field, the complete unification, the fulfillment of Einstein's lifelong dream that we could somehow come to know, to understand the fundamental unity of life, the source of the universe and the origin of all the laws that govern it. That progress has been in the form of string theory and M theory, which are essentially two sides of the same coin. And this is the theory in words, not math, that the science presents. There is a universal, unbounded ocean of pure existence, pure being, of infinite silence, of non-change, that is eternal. It was there before the universe emerged, and it will be there when this universe ceases to be. And although it is deeply silent at its depth, on the surface of this ocean, it is brimming with this dynamic activity, a result of the quantum uncertainty principle, where it is continuously erupting in a sea of effervescent foam, like ginger ale effervesces bubbles. Now, those bubbles aren't ginger ale, actually, but they take the mathematical form of tiny loops called superstrings, elastic loops, Think rubber bands. And you may say, wow, who ordered that? We're trying to seek to fathom the mind of the divine, to come to know the creator of the universe and the laws that inspire him or her. And we end up with a world made of rubber bands. It could be disappointing until you realize, no, it's not the rubber band. It is the ocean, this infinite ocean of concentrated intelligence and virtually infinite creative dynamism that gives rise to this eruption of rubber bands. That's where the real intelligence lies. Now, what good is a rubber band, and why would the creator choose that form of expression? Well, rubber bands are useful for many things, as you know. But what makes them special to physics is, and don't forget, please don't forget this. This is the one thing I want you to remember today. Rubber bands wiggle. End of lecture. No. They vibrate. And if you're a total physics nerd, you can calculate actually the different ways, enumerate the different ways that a rubber band can vibrate. It can vibrate this way, and clockwise and counterclockwise. And since these rubber bands happen to live in 10 space-time dimensions, there's a lot of wiggle room for them to vibrate. And so this is a non-trivial challenge, but it is tackleable, and it has been tackled. Now, the one thing to note before I sort of wrap this up, this physics intro, is that different vibrational states of a rubber band have different frequencies. Some are very lazy and lethargic, like Leonard Hintz, and others are very, very frenetic. This is like a Vata rubber band. So different levels of energy, of vibration. Now, so these different rubber bands percolating out of this ocean of nothingness, ocean of pure abstract existence, these material-like rubber bands have different masses. Because Einstein says that the energy associated with the vibration is equal to the mass, E equals mc squared. So these rubber bands have different masses, and you can compute them. And the miracle of string theory is this, that when you look at these rubber bands on the right, erupting from the unified field with different masses and different properties like electric charge and other types of charges, they give us exactly the fundamental particles and forces of nature. They match with what we think of as the photon of electromagnetism, the massless photon, the massless graviton, the particle of gravity, with the radioactive force and the strong force and the electron and the neutrinos and the quarks, etc. Those are the particles that the unified field automatically gives you. And by the way, it's not just that we came up with string theory because we thought we might try it to see if we were lucky. String theory is the only logical, mathematically consistent reconciliation of two well-established facts. Gravity exists, and it does. And quantum mechanics is real, which it is. Starting with that alone, you can derive the universe. And that's what string theory successfully does. And it's not just the elementary particles that we're talking about, it's the whole universe of things and humans and planets that are all made of the elementary particles, and therefore all a big tangle of string. So let's focus for a few minutes, and this is going to get to Ayurveda now. Focus for a few minutes on the most fundamental of these elementary particles and forces, and I'll just list them for you. There's the spin 2 graviton, the force of gravity. There's the spin 3/2 gravitino field, which is really does nothing of any particular value to human life. There is the spin 1 forces, electromagnetism, light, radioactivity, the nuclear force. There are what are called the matter fields, spin 1/2 matter fields. That's everything material. Your lunch today was made entirely of spin 1/2 particles, quarks and electrons, bottled up in protons and neutrons, bottled up in atoms, bottled up in molecules, and bottled up in your sandwich. So that was your lunch, the spin 1/2 matter fields. And then, since I was asked, the much ballyhooed Higgs boson, the spinless Higgs boson, which was championed by the press, I should say only, as the God particle. Godly, I'm not sure, but it does play an important role. It is the particle which, shortly after the Big Bang, made many of the other particles massive, because they all started massless. Only when the universe cooled did they acquire their mass, like the proton's mass. And that was due to the influence of the Higgs boson. If you're looking for God, though, I would look deeper in this chart. So these are the 5 fundamental, you could say, spin types, the building blocks of creation. And only these 5 can exist. They're the only logical, mathematically consistent possibilities, and this chart shows all the known particles of nature fit into these 5 categories. Remember, though, these aren't particles really. These are just vibrational states of the unified field. The unified field is like an instrument. I'm not exactly sure what this instrument is, but it served my purposes today. An instrument that has its own natural frequencies, like a guitar starts with E, and what's next? G or A, maybe? These instruments have their own natural reverberant frequencies, and that's it. You've got this ocean of pure intelligence, pure existence, rising in waves of vibration, reverberating within itself, and those reverberations fall into specific frequencies. And the presence or absence of those frequencies spells the presence or absence of all these particles that fill the room. So this room is essentially a symphony. Ultimately, it's not a material universe. It is a universe of vibration. Vibration of what? Absolute abstraction. Unbounded universal intelligence. Pure existence. And that's it. There's nothing else other than that. Now, here's where I want to get to. These 5 spin types actually emerge, you could say, from 3 more holistic entities called superfields. Gravity superfield, gauge superfield, matter superfield. And from these, the gravity superfield, the graviton and gravitino emerge, etc. So mathematically, in today's unified field theories, there's a natural pairing of these 5 spins into 3 more holistic entities, which we call superfields. These are important because they are the first manifestation of what we call physical creation from the completely unmanifest, transcendental, unified field. Now, I'm going to go through this really quickly because it's not important, but I did promise that these really weren't physical particles, that they're vibrational states of the unified field. And this chart shows more specifically what vibrational states. The gravity superfield and everything that emerges from it all come from clockwise rotations of superstrings. The other force fields of nature all come from counterclockwise rotations of superstrings. So they're just vibrational states of the unified field, no more. And finally, lunch today came from these other type of vibrational states of the unified field. So you ate for lunch a tangle of vibrations of infinity, vibrations of the unified field. And because it's going to come up briefly later, I'm going to just for a moment try and describe what those vibrations are. Because if you're smart, you're probably asking yourself, well, I've exhausted all the clockwise ones, and I've used all the counterclockwise ones. So what's left? How do we get matter in the universe? Gravity's fine. Electromagnetism is fine, but you can't enjoy them for lunch. So where's my body? Where does my lunch? It comes from here. And what is this? What are these vibrations? Well, the vibrations come from the fact that string theory lives in 10 dimensions. We live in 4. We have to hide these extra 6 dimensions, or we have a really embarrassing situation, an embarrassment of riches on our hands. Don't get stopped by the police and tell them you're studying the 10th dimension. You're going to find yourself in a place you don't want to be. Because nobody sees these extra dimensions. And why not? Well, this chart actually shows why. It's called space-time compactification, which is a fancy way of saying they're spindled up into a tube like you'd spindle a piece of paper up into a tiny tube. As tiny as you can. And these are really tiny, so that they become invisible. So from the back row, if I spindled up a paper very finely, it started as a two-dimensional sheet, but it ends up as a one-dimensional line. That's called space-time compactification. It's relatively easy to do. So in addition to the 4 dimensions that are left that we see, and this doesn't work, it's okay, the 4 dimensions we believe we live in, those are the ones we see, there are these hidden dimensions, 6 curl-up dimensions, and it just turns out that those dimensions are like a rubber hose. And a rubber hose can wiggle. And here it is, the rubber hose is wiggling, and it turns out that those wiggles that propagate through space are another type of vibration of the unified field, a very particular type, and those are responsible for lunch. Those vibrations behave like electrons and quarks and make up really all matter within our bodies and all the matter in the universe. That was, what do you call too much information. So, but this has a direct impact now on I think our understanding of Ayurveda. These 5 fundamental spin types, we say, which are not particles, but very fundamental essences, they're just vibrational tones, the fundamental frequencies of the unified field. Those are identified by modern science, but those have been talked about for eons by Vedic science, by the ancient sciences, knowledge traditions of China. These fundamental 5, sometimes they're called earth, water, fire, air, space. When you hear about earth and water and fire and space and ether as the building blocks of creation, which come from these ancient traditions, you tend to think, if you're a Western, oh, how quaint, maybe how primitive. A nice effort, but way, way up, because we know there are 111 elements, chemical elements. What the world's really made of is atoms. Well, on a superficial level, yes. But what are those atoms made of? They're made of these fundamental essences, according to physics. These are the fundamental building blocks of the universe. And these 5 correspond exactly with the Pancha, the Mahabhutas, the 5 Mahabhutas, or perhaps more accurately in this context, we could say the Tanmatras. The 5 being Akasha, Vayu, Tejas, Apas, Prithvi, space, air, fire, water, earth, etc. And this looks like a nice numerical kind of coincidence, but it's not. It's a very, very deep identity. You can take all of these and study them in depth. Without doing so today, what do we know about Akasha? It's space. It's ether. Space not as nothing, not as just plain emptiness, not like an empty stage, but as a subtle substance. Akasha. It flows. What is the spin 2 graviton? Well, it's the force of gravity. It's curved space-time geometry. It's space as, we say, relativistic fluid. It's a very, very subtle fluid. It has 0 viscosity. You can move through space at high speeds and feel no drag, but it is a liquid. And it has the properties of, well, it's space. It's Akasha. Space is subtle substance. You could look at, say, Agni or Tejas, fire. Well, fire in the Ayurvedic literature is very important. It's Agni, it's digestion, it's heat. And what is spin 1, its corresponding element in the language of modern physics? Well, the spin 1 force that has any relevance to our life is electromagnetism, which is heat, light, chemical structure and chemical transformation, fire. And you can go down the list and examine the properties, and it goes deep, of all of these things. These are 2 words for the same thing. And even more relevant to Ayurveda is that, as I said before, these 5 spins are not quite the ultimate inception of physical matter. That is this deeper level of the 3 superfields. And these 3 superfields are in Ayurvedic language, what we call three doshas, or again in this context we might even say three prakritis, because this is a very fundamental level of description. And they are the same. As I said before, in physics, there is a very, on the left-hand side, very specific pairing of these 5 spins into these 3 more fundamental entities called superfields. No other pairing is mathematically sensible. These are it. And if you go to Charak, in the Ayurvedic texts, they will say similarly, Akasha, or Vata Prakriti, is a combination of Akasha and Vayu. Pitta Prakriti, combination of fire, Agni, and water, Jal, Apas. And Kapha Prakriti is a combination of earth and water. And structurally and functionally, if you look into the literature, these have the same properties. So now to Ayurveda. Ayurveda is really, in its sort of theoretical core, in its foundation, is dealing with the human physiology at a very deep level, the level of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. That is a very profound basis for physics, physiology, and for medicine. Now, modern medicine, as it's generally described, is far from that. The focus of modern medicine today is mostly on pharmacological medicine, drug therapies. And that's, of course, modern medicine also has its more macroscopic, dealing with the gross physiology, with things like orthopedics and surgery. But really, it's really focused primarily on the pharmacological level, chemical level, atomic level. And that's powerful, but it's also complicated and prone to side effects. There are tens of thousands of biological molecules, organic molecules in the human body that play a role. And if the doctor decides you're low on testosterone, so just turn up the number or whatever, taking that particular drug or that particular compound may elevate the concentration of that one molecule, but it typically upsets the concentration of perhaps hundreds of others. And that's just the nature of dealing with the human body at such a complicated level. Now, Ayurvedic medicine has a rich pharmacology, very rich in terms of natural herbal medicines. But it's all informed by this fundamental understanding, which is guiding the Vaidya as to what to prescribe that would be appropriate. And if this is guiding the thinking, let me show it over here again. This is guiding the thinking, the probability of negative side effects is extremely low, because this is a very holistic level of dealing with the body, and a level that is, by the way, 1,000,000, million times more subtle than chemistry. 1,000,000 times potentially more powerful than chemistry. Able to treat, subtle as it is, chronic illnesses, for example, where modern medicine throws up its hands. But that's not the limit of Ayurveda. Ayurveda really, when fathomed deeply, extends all the way to the unified field itself, to the field of unity itself. Ayurveda, as this chart shows, extends all the way to the unified field, or in a different language, all the way to the level of what we call the Atma, the true self, universal being. And it's really yoga, which is a part of Ayurveda, so certainly incorporated into Ayurveda, is what specializes in bringing the enlightenment, connection to, and experience of Atma. We can call it Atma in one language, unified field in another. And for many people in the room, it may be obvious that the deepest level of human nature, which is our own consciousness, ought to be the deepest level of everything else in creation. If you scratch anything hard enough and long enough, you'll eventually claw your way to the unified field. If you go deep within the essential core of human nature, you will find yourself in that infinite state of infinitely expanded awareness. That's what yoga is fundamentally for. So, for an audience like this, I could probably just leave it here, but I want to actually support that statement that the Atma, experience of pure consciousness, unbounded awareness, is the direct subjective experience, communion with, identification with universal intelligence, the unified field. That's what Samadhi is. So let's talk a little bit. What is yoga? Yoga includes, of course, working on the level of the body, working on the level of the breath, but really also, and most fundamentally, working on the level of mind, intellect, and ego. And the mind, parallel to physical nature, has a hierarchical structure. There's the surface level of mind in the Vedic literature of yoga, that's called Vaikari from Vach, speech. These are articulated thoughts. You're not speaking them, but you can certainly hear them. I want a pizza, as bad as that may be. I mean, those are the thoughts. This is where we find ourselves talking, chatting to ourselves all day. There's a more subtle level of thinking called madhyama, abstract conceptual thought. And a lot of academics and mathematics and physicists spend a whole lot of their life dealing with abstract concepts. They're subtler, they're more powerful, very expanded level of mind. Beyond that is pashyanti, which is the level of finest feeling, faint feeling level, as just a very, very shallow, faint, and expansive swell on the surface of the ocean of pure abstract awareness, the Atma, the universal self. So this is actually a little bit beyond what Western psychology knows about the structure of the mind, but it's very useful to be aware of that structure. Now, give credit to modern mathematicians, where credit is due. They have taken the human mind and human comprehension, and they have hierarchically established the increasingly expanded states of mind, the deeper and more subtle, more abstract, more expanded, more powerful levels of mind. And they've created a language for each of those levels of the mind. Just to familiarize yourself with what I'm talking about, you know about the counting numbers 1, 2, 3. That is pretty much all you need in life if you're going to dedicate yourself to a life of retail shopping. But there are more expanded levels of mind and of math. There's what's called the whole numbers, which simply involves adding the additive identity 0 to the counting numbers. They are more powerful, more complete, slightly. The integers include the negative numbers. It's a more complete system, more powerful. You can subtract. Before integers, you can't define subtraction sufficiently well. Rational numbers, bigger still, include all the fractions between the whole numbers. And at that point, you are qualified to do very sophisticated accounting. And that's all you need for very sophisticated accounting. The real numbers fill in all the gaps, because between any two fractions, no matter how close, there is an enormous infinity of additional numbers in between that cannot be expressed. They're called transcendental numbers. They're very subtle, but without them, without the real numbers, you can't do, there we go, classical physics. Newton had to invent the real numbers to do calculus, and we need calculus for most of science. The complex numbers, I'm not even going to try to explain, but you need them to do quantum mechanics. And the mathematicians just don't quit. Beyond that, there are what are called function spaces. You need them for quantum field theory, limits of function spaces, products of function spaces, and that is the end. That is the largest conceivable infinity using human accessible logic. But you can also prove there is an infinity greater than that. There's an infinity beyond the intellect, which we call the universe of sets. But we can't say much about it, because it's logically incomprehensible and, frankly, therefore ineffable, but real. And sometimes it's described as consciousness beyond comprehension. So these deeper and deeper levels of mind represent expanded levels of human awareness. And these deeper levels of human mind, with their own natural languages and logics, fit nature like a glove. every deeper level of understanding of what we call the physical world requires these more expanded, more subtle, more powerful levels of mind. There's an intimate connection between mind and matter, a connection that becomes more profound the deeper you go. On the surface level, what's the difference between a thought of a pizza and a pizza? A lot of difference. I'm not going to pay you $7.50 for the thought of a pizza. I can have a thought of, I want a pizza. But the difference between the thought of something and the reality of it starts to disappear at quantum mechanics. And at the very basis of the universe, the distinction is gone. So that this Atma, this infinitely expanded comprehension, this universal state of awareness, which is the source of mind, is really the same as that universal intelligence, the unified field that is at the source of nature. You can get it from this logic. There are at least 5 logics which would make this very clear. I was going to give, but I think I will skip, as much as I love it, a quantitative proof of that statement. Again, there are 5 proofs. This is the one physicists would appreciate, but I also appreciate that we're not all physicists in this room. I guess I'll just flash the pictures. What I do establish in this is that I'm going to equate pure consciousness, Atma, infinitely expanded human awareness, as the direct experience or identification of human awareness with universal awareness, the unified field, through their numerical structure, through their quantitative structure. The unified field has a quantitative structure. Let's take a look at it. It's an amazing thing. The unified field has as its most compact expression what is called the 10-dimensional superstring. It is so compact, it is like, you can think of it mathematically as a 10-dimensional sphere, perfectly symmetric. Well, that's beautiful, and in a way it's beautiful. If you look at what that means, a string basically, it's the mathematics of a string moving in 10 dimensions of space-time, meaning moving in 9 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. Well, if a guitar string vibrates can't vibrate this way, it's held in place, but it can vibrate this way, and it can vibrate that way. So a string can vibrate in 2 dimensions if it's living in 3 plus 1 dimensions. But a string that lives in 10 dimensions, or 9 plus 1 dimensions, uses up one of those dimensions because that's the direction of the string, but there are actually 8 independent perpendicular directions, and that means that this string theory is fundamentally a string theory of 8 elementary particles. Great. Except our universe has 192. So this seemed like, it was so beautiful, it was so symmetrical, it was so fabulous, and the mathematics so dizzyingly amazing. It was a great elation followed by a great depression, in that it may describe some universe, but it doesn't describe ours. But think about it. A banyan seed begins as an empty shell. And through some process that is quite astonishing, it transmutes itself in a series of incredible transformations that ultimately result in a banyan tree. Or a fertilized egg, human egg, is a relatively simple thing to start, but through astonishing series of transformations, if you study embryogenesis, amazing transformations. And Keith is smiling because he's a great fan of the zygote stage of the development of the embryo. It's an amazing thing that a human being comes out. And what has similarly been found in string theory, and this is done by somebody so smart, I honestly don't think he's from this planet. He shared my office at Harvard. His name is Ed Witten, and he looks like a Martian because his brain is absolutely gigantic, like Mars Attacks, if you've seen the movie. And he has been able to fathom some unbelievable mathematical gymnastics to show that this compact seed of the 10-dimensional superstring undergoes an incredible transformation, as dramatic as a worm, caterpillar becoming a butterfly, and represents itself as the 26-dimensional bosonic string. It just spontaneously does that. And when it does that, what happens is simple theory of only 8 fundamental particles now becomes 24, which is 26 minus 2. And you think, wow, so some slight differentiation is coming out of this indivisible, uncrackable wholeness of the unified field. And the next stage of transformation happens automatically, and I showed you this, when 10 dimensions become 4. Well, that changes a theory. How could it not? When you take those extra dimensions of space and you roll them up, your 10-dimensional theory, you take away 6 of its dimensions, is going to behave very differently in 4 dimensions, in our space. And in the process, what happens is these 24 degrees of freedom become 64. And the final stage of this drama, I know you can't wait to hear the punchline, the final stage in this drama is that these 64 become 192, which gives us the universe in which we're sitting right now. And how does that happen? It happens because of these hidden dimensions, these extra dimensions. It's actually not, you might have preferred it, I preferred it, but it's not the case that they're rolled up in a clean little circle into tidy tubes. No, they're crumpled up into a ball called a Calabi-Yau space. And the structure of those hidden dimensions, the geometric structure, is very specific, and it's given explicitly from the mathematical theory. Can't be anything else. It's 6-dimensional, and what I'm showing you here is just a 2-dimensional shadow of something that's even much more complex than what I've drawn. Now, why that helps us is that, here's another drawing of that, the structure of our crumpled up hidden dimensions of space, is that superstrings get caught on these, they get snagged and trapped, wrapping around the tentacles of these extra dimensions, and they can vibrate back and forth along those hidden dimensions of space in a much more complicated way than we imagined before. So what happens as a result of this wiggling worm, this purple wiggling worm, is much more complicated than if it were a tube, a straw. Now it's a Calabi-Yau space, and you get 128 additional vibrational states that are candidates for the elementary particles in your brain and in your stomach. So we end up with 192, and this is exactly how, through this internal metamorphosis, all hidden within the depth of the Planck scale, beyond the Planck scale, beyond what we normally call time and space, but emerging from that is the 192 particles. Now, this will be really quick, because we don't have time to do anything else. What is the structure of our universal self? What is the structure of our own Atma? What is the structure of our own maximally expanded pure consciousness? That is an experiment you can do at home. Through meditation, you can fathom the depths of human consciousness. And in that depth of silence, you will hear reverberations. That doesn't necessarily come in the first few months of meditation, but it does come. Those reverberations begin as a sort of hum. It may be even like being, if you've ever been to Chandichok or any similar market, it's like kind of a distant roar, and you can't make out anything, but it's definitely lively, it's definitely buzzing with activity. And when you get closer, you start to hear somebody saying, orange is 2 rupees. You'll start to make out different sounds within that hum. And those sounds, the natural reverberant frequencies of the unified field, well, are called, it's the vacuum energy, it's the fluctuations of the field that we've talked about. But in the Vedic literature, these are called the vrittis of Atma, the fluctuations of consciousness. And the fluctuations of consciousness in the transcendental silence is the subject of Karma Mimamsa, it is the subject of Vedanta, but it's really the core subject of what is called Veda, especially Rig Veda. And there is a structure. And I'm saying that a glimpse of this can be gained at home, but the great sages have done the heavy lifting for us, and they have laid out in detail this sequential mechanics through which indivisible wholeness of absolute silence transmutes itself into the universe. And it's unbelievable. The superstring's unbelievable, but this is really unbelievable. And honestly, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi really gets tremendous credit for this. Of all the things he did, nobody knows about this, but future generations will marvel over the intricacy of the knowledge of the dynamics of transformation, of indivisible unity into the multiplicity of the universe. And just to give a picture of it, Rig Veda starts as unity, represented by the first syllable of the Veda, Ah. Ah just means fullness, wholeness. But Ah quickly becomes Agni, Mi, Le, Purohitam. And it starts this sequence, this unstoppable sequence of continuous transformation of sound becoming silence and a new sound becoming silence. And the first, other than Ah, which is in itself a complete expression of knowledge, though too abstract to fathom, that's like the superstring, the 10-dimensional superstring. It's all there, but you can't crack it. But Ah expresses itself, and there's incredible dynamics as to how and why, but it expresses itself as Agni Mile Purohitam. That's called the first para of the first richa of the Rig Veda. And that first 8 syllables is itself a complete package of knowledge. The knowledge contained in Ah, somewhat elaborated. But then Agni Mile Purohitam continues to Yajnasa Deva Mitrijam Hotaram Ratnadatamam, the first 24 syllables, and that itself is a complete expression of knowledge, a further elaboration of Ah, then the 8-fold elaboration, now the 24-fold. And from there, I won't go through the gymnastics, but the next 64 syllables emerge in the remaining 8 riches of the first sukta, giving us a 64-sized package of the total knowledge that is contained in Ah. And from there, the next 192 syllables unfold, a complete package of knowledge. That's the first chapter of the Rig Veda. And then ultimately, from those 192 syllables that I've just discussed, the 192 suktas of the Rig Veda emerge. More precisely, they don't emerge as much from the syllables as from the dynamics of silence in the gaps between those syllables. And from the Rig Veda, first mandala, the 10 mandalas of the Rig Veda, the Upavedas, and the whole Vedic literature, you can trace the sequence of self-unfoldment. That's why they say Veda is nitya aparashaya. It is eternal. It is uncreated. It tells its own story. It gives its own commentary. So just comparing, this is very quick, and it has to be even quicker, just comparing the structure of the superstring, how unity becomes diversity, and the structure of the Rig Veda, which is considered to be the blueprint of the universe. It is the core origin of all the different limbs of the Vedic literature, including yoga and Ayurveda. The structure of these two are, I would say, identical, at least at this level. And that supports, that's the sort of an argument a quantitative nerd or physicist would insist upon if we're going to make the claim that these two incredible realities, the universal intelligence of nature, the unified field, and individual intelligence maximally expanded. To say they're the same, they say, give me some quantitative proof. No semantics. Give me the numbers. Show me the numbers. This is an argument they appreciate. So anyway, on that basis, I'm going to say yes, for the purposes of today, we will say that pure consciousness experience of Atma is the direct cognition experience of universal intelligence, the unified field. So now I'll complete this. What then is yoga? Yoga is a practice for fathoming the depths of consciousness. In traditional yogic meditation, you start from where you are. And where are we typically? Where are we right now? We're on the surface level of mind. We're on the level of articulated speech and articulated thought. And normally, when thoughts develop, they begin from deep inside as a subtle impulse, not even recognizable until it sort of erupts. Oh, it's dinner time. But there's a gestation that takes about a half a second, maybe a second for some people my age, several seconds. For a thought to manifest, it has to kind of go through the machinery of the formation of thought and suddenly becomes concrete enough that our dull minds can recognize it. So what yoga is, it starts on the surface level of mind with a thought, which is where we always are, and it turns the attention systematically within to experience automatically, it's a big automatic, experience progressively more subtle, more refined levels of the thinking process, fainter and fainter, more abstract levels of mind and feeling. And then the subtlest impulse of feeling slips away, is left behind. And then you find yourself in a state of absolute abstraction and infinite expansion. In absolute abstraction, there's nothing to localize the awareness. The awareness becomes, therefore, unlocalized, and that is the state traditionally known as Samadhi, the temporary state, even a fleeting state, oftentimes. And more practice of meditation makes it more permanent. So Yoga Sutras begin more or less, second verse actually, is yoga, experience of inner unity, is simply the complete settling of the activity of the mind. It continues, then the seer is established in the self. And throughout time, Samadhi has been considered to be a fourth state of human consciousness, a fourth state. That means not waking, not dreaming, and not deep sleep, something else. It says the peaceful, the blissful, the undivided is thought to be the fourth. That is the self, capital S. That is to be known. Or from another Upanishad, the fourth state is Atman, in his pure state, the awakened life of supreme consciousness. What is pure consciousness like, especially in the early days? It's purely consciousness. Don't tell your mother you're going to go to a school where the goal is to spend one's life in meditation, in a state of, oh, Ma, I just want to, it's so sweet down there, I just want to, she said, right. Yeah, who's going to support you? And she's really smart, she'll say, and who's going to support me? No, Samadhi is not a functional state, but it is a very important state. It's called the stepping stone to higher states of consciousness. A couple more quotes about Samadhi from the Upanishads. It is neither outer nor inner consciousness, neither semi-consciousness nor sleeping consciousness. It cannot be seen or touched. It is above all distinction, beyond thought, and ineffable. And I like this. I've used this a lot at big conferences on consciousness. It is in the union with him. The union with him is the supreme proof of its reality. It is peace and love. So, does consciousness exist or doesn't it? Is it a mirage? Is it a byproduct of electrochemical processes with no deep reality, no deep truth? Or is it something fundamental? It's been debated throughout my life, and probably since Greek times, there's a continuous philosophical debate about whether consciousness is. So now you can just say, well, do the experiment. Take a few days and start to experience that reality. And that really does put the argument to rest. Now, very important, this fourth state of consciousness, is it fact or fiction? Is it mythology? Is it scriptural only, or is it scientific? It's scientific. It is a unique state of the human physiology. It's characterized by a state of deeper rest, the deepest, much deeper than relaxation or sleep. And as being a state of deep, deep rest and deep physiological relaxation, it's also a very powerful stress buster. And we've talked about that, and I won't dwell on it, but there's a difference between relaxation and samadhi. A big difference in terms of the profundity of the rest, the depth of the silence. And of course, reducing stress reduces and prevents stress-related illnesses. We talked about this today. It can actually prevent heart attack, stroke, and death. This is significant. This is medically and scientifically significant. The real fun, though, is what's going on in the brain. And what's going on in the brain during those moments of pure, unbounded awareness, which may, again, be fleeting or it can last a minute or several minutes, is this remarkable state of coherence in the brain. The entire brain, from the very front of the brain to the back of the brain, if you look at the actual electrical activity in the brain, it is globally coherent. It's globally synchronous. That's not something you see in waking, dreaming, sleeping, hypnosis, or in a drug-induced state. So if you compare normal rest, eyes closed rest on the left, what happens when you transcend is that the whole brain is functioning in concert. And that's the difference between orderly thinking, coherent thought, and not so coherent or orderly thought. And orderly brain functioning correlates with pretty much everything you'd want. It correlates with creativity, learning ability, memory, grade point average, IQ, moral reasoning. We could use a little of that today. Alertness, reaction time. And as an educator, I'm very interested in this intelligence thing. I know plenty of my students who could use a little more of it. In fact, everybody could use a little more of it. Whichever measure of intelligence you measure, there's highly statistically significant increases in the intelligence of the brain as it functions in a more coherent fashion. And this is true not just for college students, those are the first studies. This is true for the institutionalized elderly in nursing homes, average age 80. Very, very significant effects in terms of increasing acuity, intelligence, memory, mental acuity, performance. So very important, very fundamental. And I should add, you might think, well, why don't schools all over the place do this? Because, little Johnny's not so smart, to be perfectly candid, and he could use a little help in unfolding his full... So, but that didn't really crack open the public schools. Public schools in the US are very conservative when it comes to introducing some foreign thing. I don't want my Billy to learn do that foreign thing, that meditation thing. It's not our culture, we tend to think, and if it's coming from out there, who knows? So it's just been really difficult, but here's what broke the ice. ADHD has become quite an epidemic, and it's a stress-related learning disorder from a lack of coherent functioning of the brain. And children with ADHD, most early study was on 11 and 12-year-old kids with ADHD. In 10 weeks, they had shed their ADHD symptoms and medicines soon thereafter. Well, that really was a big thing, and now as a consequence, starting where else but San Francisco, twice daily incorporation of transcending meditation in the classroom has become big, so big that we can't actually supply the teachers to spread it as fast as it needs to spread. And now it's gone everywhere. It is LA and San Diego and New York and in fact 22 countries in Latin America just in the last 2 years have introduced this in many cases nationally into their educational programs. And basically, it's because of the result. This theory I'm talking about today is not going to impress neither you nor any educator. It's the results. It's the actual effect on scholastic performance, on dropout rates, suspension rates, graduation rates, and so forth. So that's big. Now what's going on in the military is also big because of the presence or prevalence of acute stress in our active duty soldiers and returning veterans. And it turns out here that Samadhi is the best normalizer. The best way I can describe what it feels like to go into and come out of the transcendent is like finally rebooting your computer. You've had it running now for 2 weeks. It's starting to get buggy. You know you're going to lose your work. Okay, I'll take a minute to reboot the computer. And the whole thing comes out refreshed. And emerging from the transcendent is like coming out completely fresh, clear, expanded peripheral vision. With integrated functioning of the brain, you have more parallel processing power in the brain. You can take in much more information and process it. And if you do a study on the density of rods in the eye, which are the daylight viewing cells, they start to spread in meditators to include more and more of the retina. It expands basically, and because the mind can use the information, doesn't need the information normally because it's not enough parallel processing. So it's a very significant thing. I'm going to mention this because it was mentioned. Last thing I will say about Samadhi is the impact of collective practice. It says, this is kind of a wild idea, and this has taken the country a long time to kind of digest. It says in the Yoga Sutras, Tat Sanidao Vairate Yaga, meaning in the vicinity of yoga, in the vicinity of the transcendent, hostile tendencies are eliminated. Or in the Bible, the lion shall lie down with the lamb. It's a universal principle. Come together in my name, it becomes a church. There's power in a group. And now many experiments have been done. This was the 52nd such experiment where a group of volunteers came from 108 countries to Washington, D.C., where based on 51 previous studies, we were pretty confident we could take a bite out of crime in the which was called the murder capital of the world at this time. And we did. I won't go through all the details of the research, but there's a very, very strong correlation between reducing societal stress and tension when groups are experiencing that deep, deep silence in itself. And let me just pause to say, that concept of a field effect of meditation, that I could possibly have an effect on Chris, even if Chris in principle were across the campus, maybe across the world, that doesn't fit with the paradigm of consciousness as being purely a phenomenon of the electrical chemical processes of the brain, because those processes are more or less confined to the skull. Quantum mechanics tells us we are connected, and we're exploiting those long-range correlations with group meditation in a way that really works. This has been a science that's been evolving for probably 30 years now. It's really very powerful. So let me leave the subject of samadhi. I want to end with one more thought. And as I said before, samadhi is not enlightenment. Samadhi is a fleeting state. It can be permanent, but that's different. The way it's usually experienced in meditation is for seconds or minutes of unbounded awareness. Enlightenment, if samadhi is the fourth state, is a completely new style of functioning of the brain. We have to call it the fifth state at that point, and it goes on, but I'll stop there. How do you define it? The fifth state of consciousness, which I would call enlightenment, is the permanent establishment of the experience of universal consciousness in activity, during sleep, during dreaming. That the orderliness of brain functioning, the coherence and the inherent silence that comes with it is with you during the day, during dynamic activity. So, from the Yoga Sutras, yoga becomes not a fleeting state, but a well-founded state, an established state, when it has been respectfully and uninterruptedly, what's the word say? Cultivated for a long time. Is that really possible? Is that mythical, or is it only scriptural, or is it scientific fact? Well, it's scientific fact, and one of the great advantages of taking a 2-year sabbatical from Stanford faculty to Maharishi University faculty, which has now lasted for 33 years, was because I was interested, of course, in physics, but I was really also interested in fathoming the reality of consciousness, which is a goal of many. But so we got to do research in a whole community where the faculty and staff and the janitorial staff and the students are given time and techniques to practice. And what you find in the longer-term meditators, I'll just skip to that, is that during meditation, during the experience of deep meditation, periods of samadhi, you have this burst of global coherence across the brain. The difference is that people who've been practicing for a number of months, they come out of meditation, they open their eyes, and it fades quickly. The coherence leaves. But for the longer-term meditators, the coherence, and this is now inactivity during a computer game, the EEG coherence remains strong, and the subjective report is, yes, I remain uninvolved, unattached, unbounded, universal, unperturbable, untouchable, free to enjoy, without attachment, the joy of action. So a couple quotes from the Yoga Vasishtha about this, describing this fifth state of consciousness. He is awake, but enjoys the calmness of deep sleep. Or he is awake in deep sleep. So this samadhi persists even during sleep. And if you look at the EEG of somebody sleeping, who is experiencing unbounded awareness and is a silent witness to the mind and body sleeping, they have the typical wavelength of sleep shown on the top, this high amplitude delta shape on the very top, added to the EEG signature of Samadhi, pure consciousness. You add those two together, and this is what the brainwaves look like when somebody wakes up and says, yes, body and mind were sound asleep, but I never lost connection to my unbounded self. And that's a good thing. Remember, this EEG coherence is behind everything good about the brain.